say you wanna make. Call me over, pull me closer, and kiss me like you and I were 17. Why does it seem like you don't remember? You call me when you're coming down, say you never let me down. Those nights you tried to calm me down, even though I know you're just saying that. Those are words you can't take back. This is for the hearts on fire, out of control. Boy, you gotta let it know. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. So they might really know. I wish you could read my mind, or give me a sign, or tell me you wanted to be mine. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. So they might really know. I wish you could read my mind, or give me a sign, or tell me you wanted to be mine. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. So they might really know. I miss the days you would ask me anything. Say you know me, do you want me? But now you got me looking back and wondering, maybe I act like it's nothing to me. You call me when you're coming down, say you'll never let me down. Those nights try to calm me down, even though I know you're just saying that. Those are words you can't take back. This is for the hearts on fire, out of control. Oh, you gotta let him know. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. Honey, why I know? I wish you could read my mind, or give me a sign, tell me you wanted to be mine. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. Honey, why I know? I wish you could read my mind, or give me a sign, or tell me you wanted to be mine. This is for the hearts on fire, singing aloud. So they might really know. I could cry an ocean to keep me afloat, but the walls won't let me. I could leave the party, no one would know, but my feet are too heavy. Some say she's fickle as water, someone's daughter, someone's 2 a.m. kissing the night. Some know nothing about her, why she takes cold showers, why she's a girl trying to get back inside. Moon, walk me home. I'm dying here, don't leave me alone. I'm trying here, save me from love. Walk me home. If they could just breathe with my lungs for a day, then they finally get it. How sometimes the truth is just too much to say, so it festers there. Why some say she's fickle as water, someone's daughter, someone too drunk to ask for a ride. Some know nothing about her, why she takes cold showers, why she's a girl trying to get back inside. Moonwalk me home. I'm dying here, don't leave me alone. I'm trying here, save me from love. Walk me I could run, I could cry, I could plead, I could say it's never gonna get any better and leave. I could throw my hands up, I could fall to my knees, I could tell myself I'm strong enough to get all the love.
Hey, what's up, everyone? Thank you guys for joining the webinar tonight. Hope you guys are having a great summer so far. It actually means a lot to me that you're here because it's the summer. I mean, this is my favorite season, and you guys are spending it in investment in your financial education, and that means a lot to me. I feel tonight that this is it's kind of a touchy subject because the 401k is clearly the leader as far as how people are preparing for retirement. And what's interesting is that when people learn the origins of the account and its purpose, it's surprising to them, and it makes them rethink what they're doing. And so hopefully you guys have that type of epiphany or paradigm shift tonight, because the purpose of tonight isn't to say this is good or this is bad. The purpose is just to educate. And when you have a understanding or a perspective based on your education, it's different, because I feel that in our society, in large part, we've been conditioned to be told what to do. And one of those things is how to manage our finances and for what purpose. And it feels like there's this kind of collective influence of sorts just because of how big this program is, which is in the multi-trillions of dollars. So tonight, really, I want to unpack that. I want to talk about why there's some challenges if all you do is a 401k, and then also talk about how you can synergize with some other products and strategies to actually get further ahead. There's opinion, obviously. I have hypothesis about how things are, but I'm going to use some calculators and math just to demonstrate validation of those opinions and the hypothesis. So let's get into it, and I'll introduce myself in more detail in a little bit. But I feel like we just dive in so I can really benefit you guys in the shortest period of time possible. So this guy on the main screen, his name is Ted Benna, and I actually interviewed Ted back in 2017 on the podcast I was doing at the time, and he's a great guy. And I feel that he's had a lot of pressure on him because he was the first one that really took this section of the tax code and figured out a way to help. It was actually a bank at the time and their corporate officers. And from there, it really evolved into this massive program, ultimately replacing the pension program at the time. Okay, so if you guys want to just scan the QR code, you guys could check out that podcast interview. It was back in 2017. He's done a number of them since then. But if you guys want to just get to the root of the actual creator, the one that actually figured out a way to take advantage of this part of the tax code and then went around the country and educated other financial advisors, this is a great origin story, and there's a few others online as well. But what I'm going to ask you is, if when you know this information, when you realize like this has become really the baby of Wall Street, and it's housed trillions of dollars of assets and enabled a lot of investment banks and a lot of funds, okay, you can see why Wall Street is so big, because of the sheer amount of money, and just collecting fees on that and doing trades really benefits them. Now, we've been conditioned to think that this is in our best interest, and there's some benefits to it. At the same time, we're going to get into really what Ted describes as some of the primary things that he didn't necessarily, it wasn't part of the program back in 1978 when he actually created it, but it's a big part of the program today. So there's three reasons, right? The first reason is what I call the three wealth killers. The first one is taxes, the second one is fees, and the third one is inflation. So the interesting part, I'm going to go into some demonstration in a little bit, but with taxes, you think that when you contribute to a 401k, you're not paying taxes on it, right? So your contributions are pre-tax, and it typically comes out of your paycheck, and the employer, if that's the program you're a part of, usually they do a match. Okay, so they'll contribute as well, which is of benefit to the employer. So you're asking probably why is taxes a wealth killer? Well, the thing is even though you're contributing right now into a 401k and not paying tax on that, all of the contributions and any gain in those accounts will be taxed at the highest income rates, ordinary income rates, in the future. And the future is unknown, okay? And we know what the tax rates are right now, but we don't know what they're going to be in the future, okay? And the second thing is fees. Obviously, there are a lot of parties involved when it comes to administering a 401k, and those fees stacking on to each other, and they've come down over the last, I would say, 7-8 years or so, but still those fees eat away at potential gains. And the final thing is inflation, right? Inflation is just a part of the financial system that we're in. Our monetary system is a debt-based system, which means that debt continues to be created, and that expands the money supply. Sometimes it shrinks, sometimes it expands, but on the aggregate, it expands, and that means that prices are going to continue to go up. So what it means for these long-term accounts is the value of the money when you actually are going to use it in retirement isn't going to be worth what it is today. And some people are like, okay, 2.5%, 3% per year, 4% per year in some years. You don't realize it, but before it's too late, 50, 60% of the purchasing power of that money is gone. And so that has to be made up with the investments that are inside of the account. Okay, and I feel like when people put money into these accounts, they're saving for the long run. This idea of like end-all be-all strategy, where this is just the account that it's the only account that I need. The liquidity element is vital. And what I mean by liquidity is access to money when unexpected things happen. It could be some sort of health, job loss. Any event that requires money, you can't tap into your 401k other than through a loan, which isn't always guaranteed, and you're limited. There's some limitations on those loans. But the liquidity factor prevents liquidity for emergencies, and it prevents liquidity for opportunities. Okay? It's essentially the 401k does one thing and one thing only. Now, one thing I wanted in full disclosure, so I have a 401k. We offer a 401k to our company. So I'm not saying that in this account is inherently wrong, but what I'm trying to get at is when a 401k is used in a wealth strategy, it actually it could be appropriate for some people, okay? But a wealth strategy requires something other than one account to be the end all be all, which I feel in my experience as a financial advisor, that is what people bet on. And when things go sideways or downwards, because that one account is the end all be all, it has a lot of limitations when the unexpected happens. And the final thing is the market, right? I think if you go back to 1978 when Ted Benna found this section of the tax code, the 401k is a section of the Internal Revenue Code of the United States. And it defines, essentially putting money in this area and the taxation of that money. When he discovered that, there weren't the investment banks that exist today. For the most part, there were annuities and insurance products that were inside of these accounts. The 401k was simply a tax deferral meant for executive bonuses, meaning when an executive got a bonus at the end of the year, this was a way in which they could defer that bonus. And that was the origin and the original purpose of the 401k. So you can see how it's evolved since then. Now, I'll talk about just the reasons behind the evolution, which I think is important. In that podcast interview, I go into those details. But the pension, if you guys understand that word, maybe some of you have heard of it before, a pension is essentially a guarantee by an employer to pay an employee a certain amount of predetermined income for the rest of their life. The pension was a contractual guarantee that companies made. And what ended up happening is companies could not afford to keep, it was a liability and an obligation to the company. So pensions actually bankrupted certain companies. They had to restructure all their finances because of those heavy obligations. So when the 401k came on the scene, that is when employers and Wall Street put some connections together, and it was ideal for the employer to still provide a retirement benefit to their employee, but didn't have the contractual obligation that a pension had. Okay, so it was kind of this perfect storm of sorts. So there's your history lesson. If you guys want to learn more, we have multiple brains at our disposal now in the form of AI, so you guys can check out the history if you'd like, if you want to go in more detail. So the thing is as you guys are listening to this, obviously most people approach financial education with this cognitive bias, which is called confirmation bias, trying to figure out what I'm saying, the education I'm giving you applies to your situation and specifically applies to what you're doing right. So what I want to say is if you do have a 401k, if you're contributing to it, then that's commendable because a lot of people don't do that. And so it shows that you're responsible. It shows that you care about your future. Okay? But looking at that specific path, if that is the only path, that straight line to retirement, that's what I'm going to call into question. Because what we've been taught as financial advisors is a very straight line, linear planning. And I disagree with that. I don't like the training. It's not reality. There's nothing in nature that is on a straight line. Everything's curved. Everything is unpredictable. The unexpected continually happens. 3 years ago, would you have ever guessed what we're going through right now as far as the technology innovation? Right? Some did, but the majority didn't. Right? So the unexpected is always going to happen. Life is on a very weird curve, and we have no idea what's going to be thrown at us. So planning linearly, I feel, has really hurt people because it assumes that A, which is defined, plus B, which is also defined, plus C, which is also defined, equals your end result. And when those variables are fixed, it leads to some disappointment because when we have those expectations that are fixed and life throws us curveballs, it tends to throw us some challenges, and The 401k is just one of those things that doesn't do well when you have to adapt to changes in your, in your lifestyle. All right, so 1970s was a certain time. Obviously, we've had 40, almost 50 years since then where there's been innovation, but this program has really dug in because of the sheer amount of money that's there and the amount of organizations that rely on people continually putting money into the 401k. So if you think about where money goes, we put money into these accounts, it gets invested in either stocks or bonds or funds, and those funds purchase equities and purchase bonds. So it makes sense for the companies who are public that need to capitalize, need to raise money. It also makes sense to all the different parties that are part of that food chain. Okay, so those companies are established and they're really big, and there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of employees in some of those companies. And so the 401k continues to go on and relies on people just continually following the narrative. Get your paycheck, before you even get money to spend, money goes into a 401k. Okay, so this system, I would say, it's baked in, and so it's going to take a lot for you to kind of step out, zoom out, take a bird's eye view, and determine if the path that you're going on is the absolute best path. Okay. Okay, let's get into some numbers. So I'm going to share my screen and kind of help you see just some of the misunderstandings when it comes to the 401k. So the first thing I'm going to do is just show this idea of taxation, right? So that's a big one because there's a big benefit up front when you contribute, especially for high income earners who look for every possible tax benefit, because think of all the ways in which we're taxed. We're taxed on our income, and then you have FICA, which is Social Security and Medicare on top of that. Then we have state income tax, and we have property tax, and we have sales tax, and we have taxes on our utilities. Really, if you think about it, there's hardly anything that isn't taxed. And so we're always looking for ways to keep more of our money. I always do that. I spend a lot of money trying to figure out ways in which I don't have to pay taxes. Okay, and so when people contribute to a 401k, especially employees, it's one of the only tax benefits they have. So let's just make these assumptions. Let's say that you make an annual payment to a 401k of $10,000, and your interest rate is the S&P 500 40-year average, which is about 10.6%. Okay, that's $5.2 million. Now, you haven't paid any taxes. You haven't, it's pre-tax. The earnings of these funds, you haven't paid taxes on either. But when you go to withdraw the money, you pay taxes at the highest rate. So we're going to use 30% as that rate. So if you look at the average tax rate that you will be charged, and again, it could be 20%, it could be 30%, that's not going to be the point. But let's just say that the average tax rate that you withdraw at is 30%. So 273 times 0.7. So that's $3.649291 million of spendable income. Okay. Now let's look at someone who does a kind of a before or after tax contribution. So if somebody were to put money into like a Roth 401k or something that you contribute to and you don't pay taxes ever, okay, so it grows tax-free, withdrawn tax-free like a Roth, okay, you have to pay taxes first. So if that's the case, let's just use that same 30% tax bracket, which would mean $7,000 contribution. Oops. So if you do $7,000 contribution and earn that same rate, 10.6 for 40 years, okay, it's the same dollar amount. So that's one of the biggest fallacies that I've seen, and it makes sense, but it's one of those, for lack of financial education, people think that somehow they're saving money by not having to pay tax on the gains, and when they withdraw money, okay, then they're somehow going to pay less taxes. Okay, but that's not true. You're basically betting on the tax rates in the future being lower than they are today. So what I would say is even if they're the same, because of inflation, the amount of money you're going to have to withdraw in the future is more, which puts you in a higher tax bracket automatically. Okay, so rolling the dice on what tax rates are going to be in the future, okay, that is one of those things that takes people out of control of actually what's going on in their retirement years. Okay, so that's the first demonstration. Now I'll look at a couple of others. So there's another calculator that I like. And this calculator system is the one that I've been trained on for better part of 20 years now. And it's the one that really saved my business when I almost left the business in 2009 and 2010, because it helped me really see how finance works, and it allowed me to, number one, be confident in what I was recommending, that it wasn't a sales pitch, it wasn't a product pitch, it was an opinion, it was a strategy that could be validated objectively, right? So this is just one of the calculators that is part of this system that models a qualified plan. So what we're going to do is look at a 25-year-old and it essentially a 40-year time frame, so 25 years old to 64 years old. And we're going to assume, we'll just use that, actually let's just use $15,000 of contribution, and they increase their contribution with inflation. Okay, so that amount, which is just what they're contributing, is $1.2 million. Now, one of the big benefits of a 401k is you get a match. But there's something that's out there in the financial ecosystem where people think that they're getting 100% return on their match. Now, they're getting sometimes a return on the contribution, but as far as their overall portfolio is how it all grows, the portfolio doesn't double. So let's look at the value of a match. So we'll use a kind of a safe harbor, which is a very common way in which 401ks are set up, which is 100% match up to 3% typically of a person's income, and then it goes to a lower amount with some plans. So let's just say this person makes $100,000 of income. So the max would be $3,000, and we'll factor inflation into that. All right, so if you take out the match, it's 1.268. You add in the match, it's an additional just shy of so $260,000 or so. So 1.268, and it goes to 1.521. So let's look at the return on that. Okay, so if you look at that differential over the course of 40 years, it adds a lot, but it's only the equivalent of about 1.1%. Okay, so that's another thing that's really interesting as you look at matches, right? Is how people view them, and it is a benefit. Okay, matching is a huge benefit if you have an employer, and sometimes employers match more than this. Okay, but this just shows you that sometimes the return isn't what is pitched in those 401k seminars. All right, now what I want to do is look at the benefit of taxes. So when you're deferring taxes, you can quantify that benefit because it's the money that you would have had to have paid up front. So let's say we defer, and this is married. Let's just say, the $100,000 standard deductions. Let's say there's a 5% state tax. Okay, so that increases the benefit somewhat, but it's about 80 basis points. So now with the tax benefit and the match benefit, okay, you've increased your return by 2%. Now, what I'm about to show you, I don't want to really confuse everyone, but this is what goes on, because when you turn on the nightly news, if you still watch the nightly news, but if you on your Yahoo Finance app, or you're getting a ticker symbol come across you, a news flash on your phone, okay, we're given the impression that we are earning the market index. Today, the S&P did this. Last year, the S&P did this. The Russell 2000 did this. The NASDAQ did this. So we're conditioned and we're communicated that we're earning these indexes. But when in reality, there is a concept called modern portfolio theory where most 401ks are structured as a percentage of equities, which would be S&P 500 or other Dow Jones indexes or equity-based mutual funds, and bonds. So it's a percentage of equities and a percentage of bonds. So if you go to market history, this is where it gets interesting, right? Where the market says that there's 10.6%, I think it's actually 10.6%, but let's go a 40-year average. Okay, 10.68, close enough. So the S&P composite, right, which is the S&P without dividends, which is typically the benchmark of fund managers that I think it's only like 30%, 25, 30% ever beat that index. Okay, that's why the S&P 500 with dividends isn't really used. Obviously it's there, you can quantify it, you can show it, but with most fund managers, they're not directly putting money into the index. Okay, they're using a basket of mutual funds, and most do not beat the composite index, which is the 10.68. Okay, so let's look at the combined portfolio. So if we were to say the S&P composite, and we had 60% of the portfolio in that, and then we had 40% of the portfolio in the Dow Jones bond composite. So let's get rid of this, and this. Okay, that shows a blended return of 8.34%. Okay, so I'm going to copy that and put that into the qualified plan. All right. So now this is more realistic. Okay, so you look at essentially contributing $15,000, increasing that with inflation over the course of time, and earning, what looks on the surface, it looks like you're gaining way more than you're losing, but those lost years do happen, will happen. There's market corrections. Overall, the internal return is 8.79%. Okay, still decent. Now remember, the market average 8.34. The reason why it's higher here is because of the match as well as the tax benefits. Okay. Now this is basically pure funds with no expenses, and this is where it gets challenging. Because what I want you guys to realize with this is because you can get the information that is specific to your retirement account. You can know the funds, you can research the returns over time, you can research the expense ratios, the management fees. Because 401ks, you have fees associated with administration, fees associated with the actual fund management, and then there's transaction fees as well. So we're going to say, management fee wise, 1.25% all in. Okay, which brings the rate of return down to 7.53%. Now, this is the challenge where we're given the expectation that we're earning a specific index and that our money is compounding at that rate, but in reality, we get something much less. So let's just look at the difference. So if you go to this again, and you were expecting 10.68, okay, $5.3 million, and you get 7.53, okay, it's much less. It's $3 million less. Okay, and from a percentage standpoint, let's take a look at what that would be. So the expectation, 5328, 807, and the value is actually 290,407, 40 years, 1 year. So it's 57% less. Okay, almost 60% less money than was expected. Now the final thing, again, just to validate the inflation claim that I made, right? What is the value of $2.2 million in the future? Okay, so what would that value be today? So let me close all these others. Let's just use 3.5% for inflation, 40 years. So that's worth about $578,000 today, right? So this is, again, this is the reason when I saw these numbers, like I couldn't believe it. I had to run them multiple times. I had to kind of validate, go research funds, see market history, and this is sobering. So when I realized this, obviously human nature is to solve problems, which is, okay, how can we make this better, right? And this is what really was the genesis of Paradigm Life, which was essentially coming up with wealth strategies, multiple wealth strategies that would get you further ahead. And it's not just getting you further ahead, but it's also protecting you along the way. Because like I said, you know, the lack of liquidity in a 401k is like you're positioning it for a decade, 2 decades into the future. If something happens today and you need liquidity, most people don't have it. So they resort to credit and they get inside the credit spiral. And then before they know it, it's out of control. So that's what I aim to solve. And that's what we've been doing here at Paradigm Life for the last couple decades. So the idea here, just skip ahead. It isn't to say what you're doing is wrong. It's just to tell you that, listen, you're here to be financially educated. You're here to understand what you have going on financially so that you can get further ahead. Chances are you're following a path and following a set of rules that you've been conditioned to understand as what you should do, what everybody else is doing. But if you really look at the makeup of financial health in America, it's not great. And so obviously that path should be called into question. Now you're understanding the details of why it's not working so that you can step back and figure out ways in which you can make your life even better. You have to obviously diagnose the problem, understand that before you start putting solutions to it. So hopefully this has helped. So like I said, I've seen this over and over again where it's just disappointment, failed expectations, or unmet expectations. And I feel people need to know these details, need to know this data. And so I wrote a book in 2018 inside of LearnWorld, inside this academy that we created for you guys. There's a book pack, and you guys are going to be able to get access to that. I'm also on Amazon Audible, and I'm in the process of writing another book right now that should be out by the end of the year. But the idea is, our organization is not based in, hey, we think you should do this or think you should do that. It's everybody's life is different, everybody's priorities are different, everybody's goals are different, and there are certain financial principles that can be followed to create a specific strategy that will get you further ahead with more certainty and less risk. And so that ultimately is our mission. Okay, so as I mentioned, the 401ks weren't meant to solve the retirement problem. Okay, they were meant to be executive bonuses. But because of the perfect storm with pensions, they morphed into the baby of financial services and kind of the staple system that people follow in order to retire. So this is where, over the years, we looked at, we can't just have one strategy or 2 strategies or 3 strategies. How can we create a model where we can identify multiple strategies depending on the situation of the individual? Because our client base is all around the country. We have business owners, we have empty nesters, we have families with little kids, we have entrepreneurs, we have those that are in retirement. So there's all sorts of different situations. And so as we have done a lot of business with people over the years, we saw commonality. And those common things were those 3 pillars that you just saw. The first one is cash flow, which is money that goes in and out of your finances. The second one is protection, which is looking at what risks can be protected so that in the event that those risks happen or those events happen, it doesn't compromise your long-term objectives with your wealth strategy. And then finally, it's wealth, which is ultimately asset allocation. So I'm going to give you guys kind of a crash course tonight of just some things to think about. Inside of this academy, we have some older courses that we've done over the years. We're actually in the process of building out a brand new course. It's all been filmed, being edited. It'll come out in the next couple months. But this is a place where you can really get some different education than what's common and find ways. Could be one way, 2 ways, 3 ways. There's multiple ways in which you can improve your finances. I'm sure you're going to find something in here that applies to you. Okay. So as far as these 3 areas, let me get into just one that I feel is applicable, and then I'm going to get into just some financial products that we use and how we use them. But this is something that we've been using here. I wrote about it in the book in 2018, but we have been using it for many years prior. And the hierarchy of wealth is just a really simple way in which you can look at how your assets are diversified. Okay, so asset allocation is known as having your wealth in different asset classes, each with different returns, each with different benefits, each with different risk factors. And this is really common. If you look at banks and how they're positioned, if they wanted the highest return, they would put all their money into credit cards. But they don't, because obviously credit cards have a high degree of risk. So if you look at how they break down their assets, which are loans, you have safe and secure loans, which are mortgages because there's collateral. You have car loans that have collateral. You have business loans, maybe a little bit additional risk. Then you have personal loans, even more risk. And then at the top, you have credit cards, which is a lot of risk. And that's why you have different interest rates at the bottom. Mortgage interest rates, 5 to 7, well, not 5, but actually I did see a 10-year mortgage in the 5s, but maybe 6 to 7.5%. Then you have car loans in that 7 to 8% range now. But then you have credit cards in the 25 to 30% range, all identifying or being classified based on their risk factors. So the hierarchy of wealth is how we did it. So I'm going to go to the whiteboard and just kind of draw out, and then maybe I'll get back to the slides. But the hierarchy of wealth is essentially 4 pyramids, or 4 tiers of a pyramid. Okay, and these tiers represent a degree of control and risk, right? So right here, the higher up you go, the more risk. And then on this other side, the lower down you go, the more control that you have. So control is essentially a function of education. So you have professional investors that have been doing deals for decades in multiple markets. An investment for them is going to be different than a neophyte, novice that's just getting into investing. Okay? One is going to be high risk, one is going to be low risk. So that's what control is. Control is a function of merit, experience, expertise. And so tier 1, which is the bottom tier, these are your safe and secure assets. Okay, these are the assets that are guaranteed, can't lose value. Okay, and we recommend between 30 and 40% of your entire wealth in that tier. Okay, and then you have tier 2. Okay, tier 2 has a little bit more risk. Okay, a little less control, but may still have collateral. Maybe there are some. This is where your merit comes into play, where it's an investment which can lose money, so it's not a tier 1, but maybe you have some expertise. You're able to read 10Ks. You're able to understand markets. You understand different sectors. And so your investment is a lot more controllable, right, or likely than someone who's just getting into investing and opened up their first brokerage account. Okay, so in this tier, we also recommend 30 to 40%. And then you get into the more risky tiers. So tier 3, 20 to 30% allocation. And tier 4, these are the highest risk assets. Could be angel investing, could be crypto for some people that don't really know what they're doing. Okay, we put about 5 to 10% there. Now the returns, we have kind of some return ranges for tier 1. 4 to 6% net is reasonable. So net means after taxes, after fees. And remember, tier 1 is guaranteed, it's liquid, it's accessible. Okay, and so looking for that type of return as a benchmark. And then here in tier 2, it's the 6 to 10% net. And then here in tier 3, 10 to 15% net, and then 15% plus. Okay, so given the risk that's being taken in each of these tiers, these are essentially the corresponding returns that you should get. Now, what we find with clients is they have assets that are in tier 3 or tier 4 that they don't really know what they're doing. They're just putting money somewhere. And after taxes, after fees, after inflation adjustments, it's in the 6% range, the 7% range. So way more risk. And so one of the things we do with clients is we teach them that. And then there's education around, okay, how can we reduce risk and get a higher return? Or how do you increase your education, increase your understanding of what you're doing to have more control and potentially earn more money? Okay, so a lot of this comes down to financial education. And so ultimately, as you balance all of this out, right, that becomes the return that's associated with where you are today, the amount of money you're putting into savings, and what you will need in the future for whatever your goals might be. So this is something that we're not going into a ton of detail today, but the book is very specific about it, and we also have some education in the academy that gets into more details about the hierarchy of wealth. All right, let's keep going. So there's this thing broken down again. Now I'm going to get into the foundational asset of Paradigm Life. Okay, this is what I discovered, back when everything started, and I never heard of it before. Obviously, I understood IRAs, I understood mutual funds, I understood the market. But when I started to learn about ways in which you can set up insurance policies, one of the first things that made me really curious was the amount of life insurance that banks and corporations own. And so if you look at the balance sheets and the asset breakdown of some big banks, I think Bank of America is one of the ones that has a significant amount. They keep a lot of their cash and liquid and safe assets, they call them tier 1 assets, in life insurance cash value. And they own these life insurance policies on employees. They own the policy, they can use the cash value, and they benefit off of the death benefit when the employee passes on. So this is typically part of executive compensation packages, but it made me super curious as to how all of this works. So as I started to look into it, I realized that there's different types of life insurance. Okay, you have the standard bread and butter protection life insurance that if you have kids or you have a business and something happens to you, this is a policy that replaces your income. So term insurance is one of the best ways to protect from these events because it's low cost, low out of pocket, and it's more for those tail risks. Okay, the chances of something happening to one of us are pretty slim when we're younger, but it does happen. And so looking at the amount of money that you have to pay in order to protect those extreme events, it's not that much. So term insurance, the typical 10-year, then 20 years, the higher up you go, the more expensive the premium is. And it makes sense with term insurance because you're protecting for a longer period of time. Okay, 30 years is even more expensive. But then you get into whole life. Now, whole life has been around for a really long time. It's one of the first financial products in the United States, and it's evolved and innovated over the years. But whole life is essentially protection for the long run. And with just plain whole life, there's some wealth building. But I found out you can actually put more money into whole life than the actual premium. And that money goes into a cash value, which is liquid. It has some tax benefits, it grows, and it complements other assets. And it's definitely an asset that fits into tier one because of how its net returns work. Because life insurance cash value grows without paying taxes, and you earn a dividend if it's with a mutual company. And what that means is essentially if you buy one of these policies, it's like you are part of a credit union. Credit unions, right? They're not publicly traded. They distribute profits to their depositors. Same thing with these types of insurance policies. If you own one of these policies, it's the only way to do it, but you have to own one of these policies, and a mutual company like a New York Life, a Mass Mutual, a Penn Mutual, Guardian, they distribute their profits to these types of policy owners, which increases cash value even more. But here's another really curious thing is the government regulates how much money you can put inside of insurance, which is really interesting. Like, why would they limit it? And they limit it because of all of these tax benefits. So years ago, there was some, like what usually happens with the tax code, there was some abuse. People found a loophole. They found something that, that gives them huge tax breaks, and they go all in and figure out ways, and then the IRS catches on and limits it. So that's what the IRS did with life insurance. And they essentially took a maximum amount of premiums for a specific death benefit. So if you look at a 10-year insurance policy, like a 10-year term, if the annual premium was $500, then a 7702, which is a section of the tax code, is going to be like $30,000. But the reason why it's that high is money goes into these cash accounts, and it earns interest, it earns dividends, and then one of the coolest things that we'll end with tonight is it comes with a contractual loan provision. And this loan provision essentially is the insurance company lending their money against your cash. So your cash grows, it earns interest, it earns dividends, and they will lend you their money against that for whatever purpose. And it doesn't show up on a credit report. It's a contractual guarantee, and it has some of the most flexible payback terms. And so this is one of the bread and butter strategies that we have is this loan provision allows you to be optimal in the way in which you make purchases, specifically when you have to use financing. Because out there, depending on your credit, depending on where interest rates are, okay, interest and paying interest over the course of time can drain your wealth building. So having this really valuable feature will allow you to actually use financing, have your wealth continue to grow, but use financing at some of the most reasonable rates possible. And we'll end with a few examples. And then there's a single pay as well. The single pay is you pay one premium. Most of the money is in this cash value, and you never have to make a premium again. But this is an account that is taxed differently, right? So there's this 7702 limit, and then there's a single pay. And that's where we saw this, and we're like, okay, you can't call it life insurance. I mean, it is life insurance, but term insurance is just protection. This is like optimal wealth building. So that's where we came up kind of with our own term for it called the wealth maximization account. Just because if you set up policies for this purpose, it has a slew of benefits that are way outside of just the protection benefits of term insurance. All right, so this is where we get into strategy versus planning. So I'm just going to do a few examples, and then we'll be able to wrap up. I'm hoping you guys have questions. There's a section of this kind of event center module where you guys can ask questions, give feedback, and I'll answer those. I'll answer those at the end. All right. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to show you a simple way to look at how to do strategy. So let's take this situation right here which is essentially putting $15,000 a year into their 401k. It's going up in value over time. Okay, the first thing I want to show you is what happens when you reduce the contribution. I want you to pay attention to the internal rate of return. So let's say we go from a $15,000 contribution to a, let's say, a $3,000 contribution. So the return goes up to 9.62. Now the balance goes down, right? Your end balance is $1.6 million. Okay, if you kept contributing that $15,000, it would have been 4.8. So why does the balance go down but the return goes up? Okay, the reason is because a rate of return is a return on money you invest. Okay, so what happens here is you're investing less money, but because you're getting a match, because of the tax benefits, you have less money out of pocket for the actual gain that you have. So a 401k actually becomes less efficient the more money you put into it beyond the match. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we'll say, all right, let's say we reduce contributions to the match for 10 years. Okay, so the way we'll do that, just bear with me, I need to make some adjustments here. And we'll paste the values. And then we're going to take $12,000 and put it into a wealth maximization account, a high cash value life insurance policy. Now, one of the drawbacks of these types of policies is that this 7702 limit that I just showed you, it's a fixed limit. And so you can't put any money above and beyond that. So if you start with $15,000, there might be a little bit of room. But as you look at the 401k, every year you get a raise, you can put more money in, put more money in, put more money in. But with life insurance, it's actually a fixed amount, and so it doesn't accommodate inflation-adjusted contributions. Okay, so we'll go in here and we'll put, I'm just going to keep it at $12,000 going to the insurance policy, $3,000 here. But as you see, we have some contributions that you can still make, which is above the $3,000. So I'm going to put those in. So 817, 688, 563, 443, 326, 214, 105, and this year will be 0. All right, so what this shows is a more reasonable amount of money. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to create one of these wealth maximization accounts and essentially stop the premium contributions at year 10. So what that means is there's a contribution period of 10 years, and then there is enough interest and dividends to pay all future premiums, plus you still have a net gain of an increasing cash value. Okay? And so at that 11th year, you can now start contributing back into the 401k. And so let's just do a simple calculation. So present value is 10,000. If you look at 3.5% over 10 years, okay, so the contribution amount, well, actually it was 15,000. So 21,159. So I'm going to put in here 21,159, which will be the contribution in that 11th year, and that'll continue to grow. So essentially, your 401k balance is going to be $3.2 million at the end of that 40-year period of time. And then what you'll do is you'll create one of these wealth maximization accounts. All right, so let's do 40 years. Actually going to reduce this and then make this bigger. So current age, 25. We're going to load in an existing policy, so we're going to do $12,000. All right, and that's for basically 10 years. So what this shows is you essentially have money growing in cash value every single year. Here's the cash value. Now, how do you know that this is actually good, right? These are just numbers. So whenever you look at something and you determine, well, is this good? Is this bad? I don't know. You have a $400,000 death benefit that's permanent, then it grows. So at the end of 40 years, you have $1.2 million. So you'd have to compare this against another account to understand its value. So what we'll do is we'll look at, all right, instead of putting these $12,000 premiums into a life insurance policy, let's put it into just an alternative account and see what you would have to earn, okay, to match it, right? So right here you see that it has an internal rate of return, which is essentially the return a policy would have to earn every single year for 40 years, compounded, okay? So we'll put in there 5.19%, okay? And there's your cash value amount, which should be end of cash value, so 731. Alternative account, 730,888. I'm sure there's like another decimal place in there. Okay, so that shows, wow, that's an internal return. So it's earning a compounded 5% every single year for 30 years. Now, if you look at the characteristics of this account, it's liquid, it has guarantees, it has a really long track record, and also has the loan provision. But if you look at like a standard account, like a bank account, would probably be an equivalent, because a bank account, savings account, is FDIC insured. It has essentially liquidity associated with it. But you have to pay income taxes on that amount of money, the interest it's earned. So if you factor in income taxes, okay, that's a gross 6.83%. So 6.83 would net out that $731,000. Okay, now this is more looking like an investment, okay, rather than a savings account. Okay, so then you can factor in, if it was an investment and it had, some management fees, let's say a 0.5% management fee, now it's worth 7.54. So this is where the understanding of a net return comes in, because if you have a gross return of 10% and fees of 9%, it's 1, even though you think you're earning 10%. So what's most important is the net internal rate of return of any account. That's the true arbiter that you can compare against. Okay, so this right here, great savings vehicle. Okay, but the benefit is what I will end with. And the benefit is essentially this loan provision. So there's something that we teach at Paradigm Life, which is a strategy that I feel has so much possibility, so much opportunity, and it's utilizing this type of life insurance in a specific way. So the idea is, over the course of our life, we pretty much finance the majority of our big purchases, especially if we're using a 401k to do our retirement, because we're saving there, okay? And so in order to buy big things like a car or a house, okay, we'd either have to save a lot more money or finance and then pay that back. And when you pay that back, there's interest charges. Okay, so over the course of a 40-year lifetime, dozens of cars, multiple houses, vacations, renovations, there's really big purchases that, if you add it up, amounts to millions of dollars of purchases. And because people are using bank financing to make these purchases, there's hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions of dollars in interest that's going to these third parties. So the idea with having this loan provision is being able to have an alternative source of financing. Okay, so I'm going to draw on the screen again. I'm going to erase my, actually going to get a drink of water. Okay, so the idea with this policy is essentially, you first have to understand transactions, right? So if you have this as a dollar amount, right, and this is positive, and this is negative, which is debt. Okay, there's really two ways to make a purchase, right? Because people are putting money into a 401k, they don't do this, which is a cash purchase. You save up, you save up, you save up, and then you pay cash. Save up, save up, save up, pay cash. Save up, save up, save up again, and finally, and then what do you wind up with? $0. When somebody is not saving more money, they end up financing and they make payments back. And then when they want to finance again, oops. So it's basically the opposite. Okay, now what's the difference between these two? Probably the same payments if you factor in just, whatever was purchased. The only difference is that there's interest that's tacked on top of that. Most likely millions of dollars of purchases, then you add on hundreds of thousands of dollars of interest if people are paying, are using financing. Either way, you wind up with $0. Okay, so this is where this new option is available, where you have this same graph. Oops, draw that better. So with the life insurance, you're saving up, okay, and something interesting happens, right? Where you keep saving, plus you're earning interest. So guess what happens? Okay, this is interest. These are continual contributions as well. You can borrow against the account. Okay, so this guaranteed loan provision allows you to borrow up to the entire amount that's in cash value. But what we see clients do is they keep, again, that 30 to 40% in tier one. And then when there's opportunities, when there's financing opportunities, the interest that you pay, okay, actually goes to the insurance company, and it's typically, in most cases, below market interest rates. So for instance, right now, car loans are 7-8%, but some of the loans with these insurance companies are still in the 5s. Okay, so you have really reasonable loans that you could take out, and your money continues to compound. Okay, so what this does is just affords another option to make really good decisions when it comes to making big purchases. So what we do is we teach people how to make those good decisions, and not just make them, within the family, but make them potentially for their business, for their professional career, making investments in training, certifications. Okay, this is just one of those staple financial products that when you add it to a strategy, it opens up a world of opportunities. And obviously we don't have hours and hours tonight to talk about those opportunities, but those opportunities are anywhere from college education, anywhere from financing cars, financing other recreational vehicles. It's also making investments, whether it's a rental property or purchasing or making a down payment on a house. But the big thing that we really love to teach, and this is essentially the course that we're building right now. We've recorded everything. We're just putting some final touches on it. It'll be out in the next couple months. But it's the family bank concept, which is essentially starting to create some rules, create some structure around how your family manages their finances. And it's not just husband, wife. It's not just grandparents. It's grandkids. It's kids, where you're able to essentially teach them, hey, we have this pool of capital, and this is how we use it. When we want to purchase something, whether it's a car or a boat or a big vacation, this is how we do it. We are saving inside of this pool of capital. It's earning interest, it's earning dividends, but we take a loan against it and then make the purchase and then pay back that loan. When it comes to kids, You may not think that that is really important or makes a big difference, but think about what kids go through when it comes to observing the world around them, and specifically the financial world, especially today. You click on Amazon, you scan your phone, you swipe a card. What is the child thinking in their mind? It's, wow, that was easy. We got a bunch of stuff and all we had to do was scan the phone. Most parents, and this is at least how I grew up, when you asked for something, it was always no. You had to go figure out a way to, get a job. I had a paper route all growing up, multiple jobs in high school. Like, you had to go figure that out, but I had to learn on my own. But parents now have the opportunity to essentially establish this pool of capital and then teach their kids if they want a bike, if they want an iPad, if they want a pair of rollerblades, a skateboard, whatever, and eventually a car. Here's the money. Yes, you can have it, but this is how money works. Money is a representation of value, which means somebody had to do something valuable before money comes in. And so if you want this thing, here it is, but you have to actually pay that amount back, okay, by doing chores, mowing the lawn, doing something of value. So at an early age, instead of what most parents do, which is say no, you can say yes and start to teach the value of money. In addition to that, you can talk about why the family bank charges interest. Because someone saved money, they were a good steward, they were disciplined, and so saving that and not spending it is rewarded by interest. So when you buy your iPad or a little bike or a skateboard, when you pay that back, you pay back not just the amount that it costs, but also a little bit more. And that teaches kids, when they're in an age where their mind is still forming, they're still making connections with the outside world, that they can now carry a firm understanding of banking, of commerce, to their adolescence, then into college if they choose to go to college. And when you really think about that, it impacts the way they make decisions. Okay, college isn't this rite of passage, right? It's an investment. Money that required people to create value is going to be spent. And when you make that investment, you want to get a return on that investment. And so choosing a career, choosing a profession, taking school seriously, maybe still having a little bit of fun, but taking school seriously is more likely than how most kids learn, because it is the rite of passage and it's a kind of a free-for-all. And then what happens after college is paying back student loans, learning about debt, not knowing if they can afford a house or a car, and not understanding really a lot about credit cards and mortgages and car loans. And now they have to figure that out on their own. But if you teach these principles from an early age, it ingrains in them how things are purchased, how money is made, and that carries into their adult life, it carries into their kids' lives. And this is what I would say is one of the best definitions of generational wealth, which isn't just money, it's teaching essentially a system that has been around for thousands of years, and it's going to be around for a lot longer, regardless of how the monetary system is changing, how our society is changing. It seems like it's changing every day. Banking is still going to be part of it. And so being able to teach those principles internally inside of your household isn't just going to allow you to make more money and be further ahead, but it's also going to really create good stewardship for your children and grandchildren. Okay, we're almost out of time. Let me see if I had anything else prepared before we move on. So obviously we want to work with you, right? That's why we put together these programs. That's why we put together this education, is we have something of value. We have something that has benefited thousands of people over the last couple of decades, and we know that we can bring value to you. And so please call us and just do a free consultation, see what it's about, talk about your situation, and see if there's something that we can do to improve it. In the end, we take our careers seriously. We have something that's special. We've proven it with our different tools and validated different strategies. We have a lot going on in our world today. There's a big tax or the big beautiful bill, this big bill that's about to be passed. And there's a lot of things in there that people are just unaware of. tax benefits. There's stuff going on with Social Security. I feel that being able to work with a professional, work with an advisor, can clue you in on some opportunities that you may not be aware of. And so that's what we do here at Paradigm Life. Is we help people really understand what's going on in their financial life, what they want, and then we help them chart a path to get what they want in the most certain way possible. All right, so I actually didn't put a code in there. So if the team can put a QR code or a link to schedule, and then we put a book pack together that's in the Academy, so you guys can get the audiobook, get the Kindle book, get the what else is in there? There's some video commentary as well. And if you buy tonight, we'll actually send you a physical copy as well. So for $10. Okay, let's do some questions. What do we got? No questions? I'm not seeing anything on my screen if you guys are trying to put something on the screen. All right, I think we're kind of getting a new screen in front of me so I can check out these questions. And then hopefully you guys are on our email list as well, because there's we do these webinars every month. Your feedback obviously makes a difference as well, so that we can kind of position education and so forth. Is it possible to shift away from a 401k without starting over? So 401ks are pretty much offered at most big employers. And so shifting away doesn't mean you can't shift back. And so the example that I showed was what we call a 401k delay, right? Which you capitalize this type of insurance policy, which has a multitude of benefits, but a 401k you don't have to get approved. Like anybody can get a 401k. You can't get a life insurance policy, right? There's certain requirements that must be in place. So it's something that the sooner you can get it, the better. And so that's why we have kind of a strategy that will illustrate, all right, if you delay 401k contributions and capitalize these types of insurance policies, then ultimately not only does it build your tier 1 capital, but there's ways in which you can position it to increase your retirement income. When the time comes, there's multiple strategies that open up to you because of this tool. But that's one of the biggest drawbacks is it's not you're not guaranteed to get one. And so typically if you stop a 401k, you don't have to start over. Money's still there, it's growing, you're just not contributing. Or maybe you contribute to the match. And then once you capitalize a policy, the option is always to go back and put money back into your 401k at a later date. So hopefully that answers the question. The potential risks to your wealth from market volatility, future taxes, or lack of liquidity, which do you feel is the greatest threat at this point in time? That's a good question. So I would say the biggest threat. So I'll address each. So market volatility. I mean, markets go up. Here, can you put that question back on there? I just want to make sure I hit all the points there. But yeah, markets are always going to be volatile. Like there's nothing you can do there. So it's going to be a risk. And so what really happens is timing, which is when you decide to retire. Future taxes, you're always going to have taxes, but at the same time, you have a tax code that has thousands of pages that tells you how to not pay taxes, right? So, but that requires good strategy, good partnerships with CPAs, accountants, tax strategists. So I would say the biggest risk is liquidity. And it's a risk because we don't know the future, but we do know it's uncertain, and we do know that the chances of something disruptive happening is almost inevitable. And when there's liquidity, it buffers the impacts of that disruption. And obviously you can cover it with good insurance. So that's one of the approaches we take is, cash flow protection and wealth. what one family has at risk, other families don't. But evaluating that risk is vital. And so that's another thing that we teach to ensure that whatever those unexpected events in the future are, it doesn't disrupt your family, it doesn't disrupt your savings, it doesn't disrupt your wealth building. In most cases, for people, it does. But the last thing I was going to say about liquidity is, if you look at, let's say, Berkshire Hathaway. Berkshire Hathaway is known as, one of it's the icon of investing. I mean, Warren Buffett is still involved, obviously not necessarily at the head, but Berkshire Hathaway is a household name for how investment should happen. Berkshire Hathaway has 30% of their investments in cash, in liquidity. And that liquidity, the average earnings on that liquidity, and I looked at the report at the beginning of the year, is like 1.6%, right? So you have Berkshire Hathaway, which is this massive, multi-trillion dollar fund, and they have hundreds of billions of dollars in cash. So why would they do that? They do it because it's their opportunity fund. Okay, so that's another thing too. When you have liquidity, is there's a risk of opportunity cost, and what that means is you most likely have deals all around you, whether it's somebody needing to sell a house that they can't afford anymore, or sell a car because they're moving. There are financial deals like that all over the place, and if you don't have liquidity, then those deals aren't possible. I mean, we processed late last year the biggest loan that we've ever done for a client, multi-millions of dollars in a loan against his life insurance policy, because he found a lot that was next to a property he owned in Wyoming, and he needed money like immediately, or else the deal was gone. And so he was able to purchase something at millions of dollars less than what the value was, because he had liquidity. And then he went around and got permanent financing after that. But it was possible because he had these types of insurance policies in place. So liquidity, it's not just risk of essentially covering or buffering a disruptive event. It's also beneficial when it comes to opportunity costs, because those opportunities are everywhere, but most people just don't have the liquidity to capitalize on them. How quickly can someone start seeing real-world benefits after making these changes? Real-world benefits. I mean, immediately. Obviously, there's the reason why you would do something like this is because it is a benefit, but those benefits are typically subjective, meaning they relate to the situation of the individual. But usually, we're able to demonstrate, okay, making this adjustment, this adjustment, this adjustment. I mean, just the sense of having a strategy versus a plan creates an immediate, I would say, intrinsic benefit, internal benefit. External benefits, I mean, if you look at purchasing one of these policies, that's one thing that's really interesting is when you pay for this. I think we had with the policy that we were showing just a moment ago, there's a $400,000 asset that is permanent. So you contribute, $12,000, the majority of that's in cash value, and then you have a $400,000 permanent asset that's going to be passed on to your family at some point in the future, and that asset grows as well. And so it's a tool that has immediate benefits, but also some of the other things that we teach is that as your life unfolds, as you raise kids, the kids are gone, the policy applies differently at that stage, but still there's benefits to it, both when you're raising kids and also when you're empty nesters, when you're preparing for retirement. This allows you to accelerate the spending of your other assets, your house, your retirement accounts, brokerage accounts, because this could be the asset that's transferred to your estate. And it's one of the most efficient ways to pass on that legacy asset, that financial legacy asset. So yeah, so there's multiple benefits immediately. Obviously, if there weren't benefits, then you shouldn't do business or purchase anything. Why is deferring taxes into the future potentially dangerous? Yeah, it's just an unknown future. I mean, I have no idea what's going to happen tax-wise. Obviously, we were hoping for spending to go down with this new bill that's coming out. And I think there's going to be some reconciliation that happens so that there's adjustments to the federal budget. But if you think about it, this big beautiful bill adds trillions of dollars to the deficit. We already have, I think, 30-something trillion dollars in debt. How is that debt paid? How is the interest paid? It's paid by taxes. And if that debt is going up, okay, then the government needs more money. Where do they get money? Obviously, the tariffs is a big conversation right now. They're figuring out different ways to get revenue, but a big part of revenue is taxes. But then you look at municipalities, local governments. I mean, I would just encourage you guys to look at the receipts on your going out to dinner, look at your phone bill, look at whatever statement, your utility bill, your cable bill, your internet bill. Just pay attention to taxes. Taxes are everywhere. And when you have a tax, one of the most difficult things, I think it was Ronald Reagan that said, the closest thing to infinity is a government program. And what that means is that once there's a tax in place, it's kind of hard to take it away, right? And so I just see that taxes in one form or another. Inflation is a hidden tax, but taxation is going to go up. And I feel that's the reason why there's, I think, 70,000 pages when you combine the IRC, the Internal Revenue Code, which I think is like 2,500, 2,700 pages. Then you have essentially case law, and then different statute letters. I mean, there's all sorts of different ways to mitigate your tax liability. That's why we have a really strong partner in tax strategy, because that's one of the best ways to build wealth, is by having a good tax strategy. But I'm not going to get into that tonight. So yeah, taxes, I would say, are going to be inevitable. Oops, I saw a question, then it disappeared. What's the most overlooked risk inside of a 401k? Yeah, I would say the inflation, right? Because you're essentially deferring. Think about savings. You are intentionally not spending money to spend it in the future. So that's the thing with money. When you create value and money comes in, that money that comes in is either going to be spent by you, spent by the government, or spent by somebody else, okay? That's the only thing that can happen. So if you look at when the spending occurs in a 401k, depends on your age, but it's into the future, and it's also based on an unknown tax rate. So first the purchasing power is going to go down, but then the after-tax purchasing power is going to be even less. So I would say that's some of the biggest risks, is making assumptions about what type of income you need in the future that you're going to spend, okay, but don't have essentially any guarantees around how to make those assumptions. The variables of that equation are just unknown. Now you can argue that it's the same thing with other vehicles, but there's actually investments, instruments that have liquidity you can spend and use today where the value is known, especially when you can spend it without paying taxes. There's a knowing there, but there's also ways, there's multiple different wealth strategies, debt strategies, tax strategies that you can set up in your strategy as opposed to a plan that can help you leverage inflation and do it with hardly any risk. All right, what else we got? That might be it. Oh, 401k is a store of value. What benefits does the wealth maximization account provide over and above the 401k? All right, yeah. So this is, let me unpack each of these. So the 401k is actually not a store of value. So I can see why you'd say that, right? And this is something that I, obviously getting education over the years, you just come across stuff that just, most people don't understand, and even you don't understand. I don't understand. So 401k is basically a wrapper, right? It doesn't, 401k has to have assets inside of it. So it wraps an asset, and the wrapping is essentially what the tax treatment of that asset is. So 401k has to actually have something. So that something is the store of value. Now, what impacts that something, right, is how the 401k is, how that law dictates the taxation and the use of that asset that's inside. Okay, so, but the wealth maximization account is different. So a life insurance policy is a contract, right? So it's a unilateral contract, which means you make a promise to pay this premium or this amount of money, so you give it to the insurance company, and then they make a contractual promise for cash value, for loans, and for a death benefit. And it's known. With a 401k, it's unknown because there's legislation that can change with the 401k. Okay? So you look at what's known and what's guaranteed, contractually guaranteed, statute law versus contractual law. I'm not going to get into the differences, right? But you have a degree of certainty with a wealth maximization account that you don't have with a 401k. And I'm not saying it's an either or. It's not, you use them both, right? That's what I said in the beginning is this isn't like drop the 401k and do wealth maximization account. It's finding ways in which you can optimize both vehicles because they complement each other. They complement each other now, but they also complement each other when it comes to retirement income and complement each other when it comes to when you transfer your wealth through your estate. Okay, so there's different stages of life that that benefit from setting up these complementary products or strategies. So 401k has to be looked at as more of a strategy than a product. Okay, and same thing with wealth maximization account, right? Because them together as part of a strategy, right, really benefits in multiple ways, both known today but also unknown. Because, like I mentioned before, why does Warren Buffett have $300 billion of liquidity, right? It's because he's waiting for opportunities. And when those opportunities happen, he doesn't know what the opportunities are, but when it happens, he has liquidity. Same thing with you is, your neighbor could be selling his property because of a divorce or a fire sale or something happens. And if you have liquidity, you could get something of value at a discount. Okay, and that right there is a huge benefit, but you just don't know what's going to come. So hopefully that makes sense. All right, no more questions. All right, well, if you guys are still on, thank you. Hope you enjoyed tonight. Make sure, if you want to see how this applies to you, just to get a strategy, just to see some numbers and see some projections, okay, reach out to the team. There should be contact information that was posted in the chat thread, and then also the book. There's a audio, there's a SoundCloud audio version in there. You can also buy it on Audible. You can buy it on Amazon if that's what you want to do. And then just look out for our next trainings, our next webinars this summer, and definitely look out for the course that we're going to be releasing in the next little bit. But really appreciate you guys. Thank you guys for your attention, and hope to see you guys next time. So take care and have an amazing summer if I don't see you. Bye.
Home when I don't know which way is right. Love me when it's hard. I promise that I'm not